Thanks very much for the opportunity to attend. A little bit about me to start. I'm an engineer by training. I did my MBA at the Harvard Business School, and I've spent my entire career working with early stage technology companies to help them grow and prosper. And currently, I'm a partner with Strategic Exits Partners, and our sole goal is to help entrepreneurs and angels to structure the best exit transaction. But we actually do more than just exits. We try to be thought leaders in interesting trends that are affecting the technology industry. And it was in that regard that we started our work in looking at virtual companies. And we started, this is before the pandemic. The pandemic didn't create virtual companies, but it certainly accelerated the trend towards them. But we noticed before the pandemic hit a few years back that we were seeing more virtual companies. They were selling for higher prices, and they were exiting early, and which caught us by surprise. It's not something that's intuitively obvious. So we started to do some research on why that was the case. And fortunately for us, is just a couple of months after we got started, the pandemic hit, and it was like watching a laboratory of virtual entrepreneurship unfold before our eyes. And it's clear that overnight remote work and virtual companies were in the spotlight. So I want to talk about first and second order effects of virtualization. And that's very interesting because there's an awful lot being written on the first order and almost nothing being written on the second order, except for the works that we're doing. So a first order effect of a virtualized company is that it has no offices at all, no leases, fixed assets, insurance, lower overhead. And because of these lower costs, the virtual companies tend to be more profitable. But it doesn't end there, because we all know that that employees, once they were found out the delights of working from home, there's some real advantages to it. Recovering of all that wasted time commuting back and forth from the office that they can invest in their families and other interests. More importantly, there's the flexible hours and a better work-life balance that they can structure, so that work is not the predominant feature, but it's one important component of life. But they get to prioritize other aspects of their life even more. So it's a less stressful way to work, a better quality of life, and for that reason, the remote staff tends to be a much happier staff. We noticed at the same time that there was a problem with, there were a few dinosaurs in the management ranks still stalking the halls. What we saw is that the pandemic forced large office-centric companies to work from home, but many of them struggled to adapt to working remotely and online. They had to unlearn decades of deeply embedded office protocols and to try and learn how to operate in a virtual environment. And some of them struggled a great deal. It was not an easy task. And this really actually caught us by surprise, because around the time that the Earth was cooling a few decades ago, at the business school I went to, there was a lot of discussion about how to manage by objectives, to empower people, and to, fully exploit all of the things that they could learn and provide to the company. Yet it appears that many managers, even in the 2020s, haven't got that memo yet and are still trying to deliver on a command and control prospect, and naturally finding it very difficult to adapt to a remote environment. Now, so there's some conflicts happening and playing out in real time here. Now that the pandemic is starting to recede, we see that many management teams want the staff to return to the office so that they can see them. But the staff, now that they appreciate the value of remote work, want to stay remote. And so we see this tension working its way out, particularly in the big tech sector, where Google and Apple have had very public battles about, what kind of work stream they want to have going forward. But the consensus seems to be developing around some kind of hybrid model with some offices and teams coming to the offices 2 or 3 times a week. So partly remote, but certainly not fully remote. But what's interesting, of course, is that the fully remote companies obviated this conflict right from the outset. Because they were fully remote at startup, they never had to deal with ossified management. And it's not surprising, really, that we're seeing more of these fully remote companies start up, because millennial workers, these are folks that are in their 20s and 30s. They were born communicating wirelessly with their friends. And so to bring that culture into the office, it's a natural progression of their lives. So working virtually is not really a challenge for them. In fact, to the contrary, it's a passion and it's a part of their identity. And like I said, they've never had to contend with old school management not being able to adapt. So the commentary we found is that, I get a Google alerts every morning with a dozen articles or so of remote work and its various aspects. But virtually all of them focus on these first order effects of managing the shift to remote work and hybrid systems. Occasionally they address office cost reductions, but they're not at all addressing the second order effects of why virtual companies or fully remote companies, as they're often known, why they sell for more money and why founders and angels earn more at exit time. There are discussions on the third order effects of how virtual companies can avoid taxes and regulation, but I'm going to skip over that because it's really not applicable to companies that are founded in the United States. So let's look at some of these second order effects that aren't getting much airplay. One of them is that virtual corporations can hire the best worldwide talent. You see, if everybody is online, if there are no geographic restrictions, then you can hire people from everywhere in the world. And so virtual companies have the advantage of attracting best employees from around the world, usually at much lower costs. Like a Filipino engineer is about a 1/3 what you would pay someone in Silicon Valley. Bangladesh, it's even 1/10. So the costs are considerably cheaper, but you also get very motivated employees because they're excited to come to work for an international, fully remote company and join other best-in-class employees from around the world. So another second order effect is that virtual companies are capital efficient. Because they have the lower expense burden, as we've talked about, they're easier to bootstrap, and this leads to two second order advantages. One is that the founders are spending less time financing and more time on the business. And as angels, I'm sure that that's something you'd prefer. But also importantly is that there is less dilution for the founders because they haven't had to raise as much money along the way. And this becomes important in a moment when I show you mathematically how that has an impact. So when you sum up the second order effects, virtual companies are cost effective, they're agile, they're capital efficient, they scale more easily, and as a result, they are more profitable and they grow faster. And that's why fully remote companies are worth more. If you look at it, from a slightly different point of view, because virtual companies are capital efficient, they do cost less to scale. They need to raise less money, and they can often avoid venture capital financing with all of their changes of control and liquidation preferences. So at the end, the founders and the angels are suffering less dilution. And as a result, when exit comes, the founders and angels are earning more of that money for themselves. And to my knowledge, there is no one out there that is writing about this second order effect of why virtual companies are worth more and why the founders and the angels keep more of the money at the end of the day. It seems to be a very wide open field, and I think I'm the only one that's spending any time in it. There are third order effects, advantages for international virtual companies in terms of domiciling where they can pay lower taxes and escape under the radar in some of the regulatory issues that are transpiring right now. But most of these are not available to U.S. citizens and companies because Uncle Sam taxes you based on your citizenship and not on your residence. And so many of these things are just unfortunately not available. But if we pull together all of these second order effects, again, fully remote companies sell for more money, their founders and angels get to keep more money. And we took our research a little bit further and developed the founders wealth creation formula to try and quantify these virtual advantages. So let me see if I can grab the laser pointer here. The founder's wealth creation formula tries to predict, how much money will end up in the pockets of entrepreneurs and angels at exit time. So we start here with the time-honored EBITDA times multiple, which gives you the equity value of your startup or of your company that's exiting, and from that you subtract the liquidation preferences that the venture capitalist will take off the top. Multiply that by the percentage of the equity that's still held by the founders. And if T is the taxation rate, then 1 minus T is the amount that is retained after the taxes have been paid. And then finally, the entrepreneur needs to pay the exit costs for the professional advisors that help in the exit transaction. Now, the interesting thing is that on every term in the formula, virtual companies outperform their bricks and mortar counterparts. The EBITDA is higher, as we've talked about. The multiple is higher. There's no liquidation preferences if they've been able to avoid venture capital. Their ownership is higher. Their 1 minus T, their tax after taxes is higher if you're outside the United States, of course. And the exit costs are often lower because these exit transactions with virtual companies are much simpler to conduct. But let's put some numbers to this to show you what I mean. And why is EBITDA higher for virtual companies? Again, we've talked about lower global compensation costs, no facilities costs, lower administration, and the companies tend to be more agile so that the revenue is higher per unit of output. So the EBITDA is going to be higher. Let's pick a number, say, of around 50% just for purposes of the calculation. EBITDA multiple is also higher for virtual companies, again, because they grow faster, they're able to attract the top talent, there's less founder distraction for funding, and from personal experience, I can tell you that virtual companies are far easier to acquire and to integrate and relocate. And so for that, buyers are prepared to pay more in terms of the EBITDA multiple. Let's assume that it's 40% higher for the purposes of this calculation. Now, the founders and their angel investors keep a bigger proportion of the equity. That's because bricks and mortar companies often raise multiple rounds of venture capital financing. And so the founders and angels get significantly diluted and the liquidation preferences start to add up. But virtual companies can be bootstrapped, less need for financing, less dilution, and hopefully no venture capital financing, so no liquidation preferences have to be paid. So let's assume that the founders can keep, say, 50% of the equity versus 20% for bricks and mortar companies. And these numbers, by the way, this one is not out of line based on what we've seen and transactions coming through our company is that very often the virtual companies have founders that retain more than 50% of the equity at the time of exit. A real advantage. Virtual companies can avoid paying transaction taxes, unless, of course, you're in the US, so we'll skip over that and go right to a numerical calculation to show you how distinct the difference is between fully remote companies and bricks and mortar companies. So let's start with the BNN company that has an EBITDA of 15 million. Let me get the laser pointer out again. So an EBITDA of 15 million and a multiple of 5, so their gross proceeds are 15 times 5, 75 million. Look at the fully remote company with a 50% greater EBITDA and a 40% greater multiple. You multiply that together and their valuation comes out at 157 million, or a little bit more than twice as much as for the bricks and mortar company. So just by being virtual, you've doubled your valuation in the eyes of the potential buyers. So let's look at the exit proceeds. So for the founders and angels in a bricks and mortar company, suppose they've raised a round of venture capital and have to pay a liquidation preference of 3 million. The founders retain 20% of the equity, as we talked about, the taxes typically 25%, and the exit cost to consummate the transaction might be $1 million. So plugging that into the wealth creation formula, you end up with an exit that the founders get to keep of around $10 million. Which is not bad, I suppose, but look how much better it is for a virtual company where the founders keep 50%, there's no liquidation preferences, and in the case of international transactions, no taxation. The exit costs are half as much, $500,000, because the transaction is easier to consummate. Plug that into this much shorter formula, and the number comes out at 78 million. So what this calculation shows is that founders earn about 8 times as much money by operating a virtual company than if they were operating a traditional bricks and mortar company. Now, we'll be the first to admit that these numbers are fairly aggressive because not every virtual company has all of the advantages listed, and many of these advantages tend to be somewhat overlapping. So the numbers are probably a little bit overstated, but based on our experience of having sold some virtual companies, we think that the exit price that they get is 50 to 150% higher, and that the founders will take away 100 to 300% more as compared to a bricks and mortar company. Now, here's a specific example that I wanted to show you that comes out of some research that we did with the Harvard Business School. I was able to get the interest of professors from 2 of my alma maters to come together with me to do some research on the financial advantages of virtual companies. And lo and behold, we found a couple of real estate companies that were good comparables for each other. eXp Realty and Redfin, I believe, both operate and are very highly present in the Northwest. So these are companies that you actually may know. They're both public. eXp was founded in 2008 in the aftermath of the great meltdown in the real estate tech. The founder, Glenn Sanford, figured if the only way he was going to survive was if he took his company remote. And so from that day forward, they were a remote company. And look at what they've accomplished. Redfin's been going for 4 years longer. EXP has got double the revenues that Redfin does, close to 1.8 billion. Looking back in 2015, they had 23 million versus 187 for Redfin. Redfin had been going longer, of course. So the revenue growth over that 5-year period was 78 times for EXP versus only 5 times for Redfin. In terms of profits, EXP turned a small profit in 2020. Redfin posted a loss, and to the best of my knowledge, Redfin has never posted a profitable year since their founding in 2004. The valuation admittedly bounces around in this fairly volatile environment right now, but back on August 26th, EXP's valuation was $6.5 billion, Redfin's was 5.3. But here's what's really critical, I think, in this analysis. Because EXP was a virtual company and able to bootstrap, they essentially did it all on no financing at all, whereas Redfin had to raise over $1 billion in debt and equity financing in order to fund those years and years of losses. And at the end of the day, the founders of EXP own 57% of the stock still, whereas the founders in Redfin are long gone. So that was a pretty dramatic demonstration of what we thought was true in terms of the financial superiority of virtual companies. And so if you look at this research and you're an entrepreneur or an angel looking to invest in a new venture, would you rather start a bricks and mortar company or a virtual company? And I think that we're going to see a lot more fully remote startups coming to visit Keiretsu over the next several years. And it's not just because of the pandemic, it's because they actually do make a lot more money for themselves and for you. So to wrap up, virtual companies sell for more money. Their founders and their angels create more wealth. And there is a paradigm shift to more remote work and more fully remote companies. It's underway, and I think it's with us to stay.